My husband inherited $10 million on a Tuesday, and by Friday, he told me I was too poor to be his wife anymore. I stood in the hallway of the house I had scrubbed, decorated, and paid for with the last of my grandmother's savings, staring at two suitcases. My suitcases. They were sitting by the door like trash waiting for the garbage truck. Brent was sitting on the leather sofa, scrolling through his phone, looking so calm it made my stomach turn. He didn't even look up when he told me that our marriage had been a transaction and his contract with me had just expired. He actually had the nerve to tell me that I'd been useful when he was a broke student living in a trailer park in Tampa, but now that he was a multimillionaire, he needed someone who fit his new tax bracket. Someone with ambition and class, not a woman who managed an office and clipped coupons. I remember the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears, drowning out the hum of the refrigerator. It felt like the floor was dissolving under my feet. 12 years. I gave this man 12 years of my life. I worked 2 jobs so he could study engineering without debt. I put my own dreams on hold, telling myself we were a team, that his success would be our success. But looking at him then, in his brand new tailored suit that cost more than my car, I realized I didn't know him at all. He told me I had until the next morning to leave because he was feeling generous. He brought up that paper I signed 2 years ago, that update to our property regime, and smirked while explaining that it meant I walked away with absolutely nothing. No house, no money, no future. He thought he was untouchable. He thought he had discarded me like an old receipt. But as I dragged my bags out into the rain, blinding tears stinging my eyes, I wasn't just broken. I was waking up. Brent thought the money made him powerful, but he forgot one thing. I was the one who built him, and he had just made the biggest mistake of his life. If you want to see how a discarded wife takes down a $10 million ego, you're going to want to stick around for this. I don't remember the drive to Iris's house. It's a blank spot in my memory. Just a blur of red taillights through a rain-slicked windshield and the sound of my own ragged breathing filling the car. I do remember the physical sensation of my hands gripping the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles turned white, as if letting go would mean flying off the face of the earth. I felt like I was bleeding out, but there was no blood, just this hollow, freezing ache where my life used to be. When I finally pulled into Iris's driveway, I sat there for 20 minutes, staring at her front porch light. I couldn't move. Moving meant admitting this was real. Moving meant accepting that I was a 28-year-old woman with 2 suitcases and nowhere to call home, discarded by the only man I had ever loved because his bank account had added a few zeros. When Iris opened the door, I didn't even have to speak. I think I just collapsed into her arms right there on the welcome mat. I remember wailing, a sound so raw and ugly it frightened me. I told her everything between sobs, the $10 million, the cruelty in Brent's eyes, the way he looked at me like I was a stain on his new designer rug. I told her about the document, that damn piece of paper I had signed 2 years ago. I repeated his words to her about how I had no rights, no claim, no dignity left. I expected her to just hold me, to offer me tea and sympathy, but Iris did something better. She got angry. She was pacing around her living room, swearing, telling me that Brent wasn't just a pig, he was a thief. She told me we weren't going to let him get away with this. But I was defeated. I felt small. I told her it was useless because I had signed the paper. I remembered that night so vividly it made me sick. Brent had cooked dinner, a rare occurrence back then, and poured me a glass of wine. He had been so sweet, massaging my shoulders, talking about how his engineering firm was worried about liability lawsuits. He had convinced me that we needed to separate our assets retroactively to protect the house in case he got sued at work. He looked me in the eye, kissed my forehead, and promised me it was just a formality, just a shield for our future. I trusted him. I trusted him with my life, so why wouldn't I trust him with a signature? I told Iris I had signed away my life because I was stupid enough to believe my husband was my partner. Iris didn't care about my pity party. The next morning, she practically dragged me out of bed and drove me into the city. She said she knew a woman, a divorce attorney named Helena Marsh, who ate men like Brent for breakfast. I sat in the waiting room of Helena's office feeling like an imposter. The place smelled of expensive leather and intimidation. I was wearing borrowed sweatpants because I couldn't bear to open my suitcases, and I felt like a child who had lost her parents in a supermarket. When we finally went in, Helena didn't offer me a tissue or a hug. She sat behind a desk that looked like it cost more than my car and asked me for the facts. I stumbled through the story. I told her about the trailer park in Tampa, about my 2 jobs, about the tuition payments I made for 4 years. I told her about the inheritance and the sudden transformation of the man I knew into a stranger. And finally, I told her about the document. I explained that he had a separation of assets agreement that I signed 2 years into the marriage, retroactively applying to everything. I told her he said I had zero claim to the inheritance or the house because of it. I was waiting for her to nod, to tell me I should just move on and try to rebuild from zero. I was waiting for the professional confirmation of my stupidity. Instead, Helena stopped taking notes. She looked up at me over her glasses, and for the first time since I walked in, her expression changed. It wasn't pity. It was something sharper. She asked me to clarify exactly when and where I signed this document. I told her, at our kitchen table, on a Thursday night, just the 2 of us. She asked if we went to a notary. I said no. She asked if a judge had ever signed off on it to change our marital regime officially. I said I didn't think so. Brent had just taken the paper and put it in his safe. A slow, terrifying smile spread across Helena's face. She leaned back in her chair and told me that my ex-husband might be a rich engineer, but he was a terrible lawyer. She explained that in our state, you can't just change a marriage regime retroactively at a kitchen table with a glass of wine. It requires judicial approval. It requires witnesses. It requires due process. Without those things, that piece of paper wasn't a legal contract. It was just a piece of paper with ink on it. It was worthless. My heart skipped a beat. I asked her what that meant for me. Helena leaned forward, her eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that made me shiver. She told me that not only was I entitled to half of everything, the house, the savings, and yes, the $10 million, but that Brent had just handed us a loaded gun. By trying to enforce a fake document to deny me my rights, he wasn't just being a jerk. He was attempting fraud. She told me that he thought he was playing chess, but he had just knocked over his own king. She said we weren't just going to get a divorce. We were going to perform an autopsy on his entire financial life. And then she asked me a question that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. She asked if I had any idea why he was in such a rush to get me out of the house, specifically yesterday. Helena's question echoed in my mind like a siren I couldn't turn off. Why yesterday? Why was the urgency so extreme that he couldn't wait 1 more week? Why did he have to throw me out into the rain like a stray dog less than 48 hours after the funeral? I sat on the edge of the guest bed in Iris's spare room, staring at the wall. The adrenaline from the lawyer's office was fading, replaced by a cold, gnawing paranoia. I realized then that for 12 years, I hadn't just been a wife. I had been a passenger. I had let Brent drive, blindly trusting his directions. Now I was stranded on the side of the road, and I needed to figure out where the hell we had actually been going. I couldn't sleep. The silence in the house was suffocating. My eyes drifted to my tote bag in the corner. Inside, buried under a mess of tissues and chargers, was my old tablet. It was an outdated model, one I barely used anymore because the screen was cracked. But it was linked. It was linked to everything. Brent was an engineer, brilliant with structural loads and bridges, but he was arrogant and lazy with digital hygiene. He assumed I was tech illiterate because I still wrote my grocery lists on paper. He assumed that when he changed the Wi-Fi password at the house, which my phone had already helpfully informed me he had done, he was safe. But he forgot about the cloud. We shared a family account. He had set it up years ago to save $5 a month on storage fees. I pulled the tablet out, my hands trembling so much I almost dropped it. The battery was in the red. I plugged it in, sitting on the floor next to the outlet, waiting for the Apple logo to glow to life. It felt like I was breaking into a bank vault, even though I was just logging into my own life. When the screen finally lit up, it started pinging. Emails, updates, photo syncs. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm of fear and anticipation. I didn't go to the bank apps. I knew he would have locked those down. I went straight to the photos. The sync bar moved agonizingly slow. Downloading 4 items, downloading 12 items. The most recent photos were innocuous. A picture of a bottle of scotch, a screenshot of a stock ticker. But then I saw it. A photo taken 3 days ago. inside our house. It was just a coffee table, but there were 2 cups. One was his favorite mug, the chipped navy blue one. The other was a delicate white porcelain cup with a lipstick stain on the rim, a shade of red I never wore. I felt the air leave my lungs. He hadn't just kicked me out, he was already moving someone in. I switched to the Notes app. Sometimes he drafted emails there. Nothing. Then I went to the recently deleted folder in the messages. This is where the arrogance of men like Brent truly shines. They think delete means gone forever. They forget the 30-day purgatory that saves women like me. There was a thread with a contact listed only as Archie Gym. I knew Brent didn't have a gym buddy named Archie. Brent hated the gym. I opened the thread. It wasn't Archie. The first message I read made bile rise in my throat. It was dated 2 months ago, a full month before his uncle died. It said, "I can't wait to be rid of the dead weight. She's suffocating me with her mediocrity." I had to put the tablet down for a second. The room spun. Dead weight. That's what I was? The woman who paid for his textbooks, who ironed his shirts for interviews, who held him when his mother got sick. I was dead weight. I forced myself to pick the tablet back up. I needed to see the rest. I needed to drink the poison to build the immunity. The messages went back weeks. Archie, who I quickly realized was a woman based on the replies discussing lingerie and weekend getaways, was impatient. She kept asking when he was going to pull the trigger. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision brought on by sudden wealth. This was premeditated. The inheritance was just the gasoline, but the fire had been burning for a long time. Then I found the answer to Helena's question. Why yesterday? I found a text from 3 days ago. Archie had written, "My lease is up on the 1st, baby. I need to know if I'm moving boxes to my mom's or to the big house. I'm not waiting anymore." Brent's reply was chilling in its efficiency. He wrote, "Pack for the house. I'm clearing the debris out Tuesday. By Wednesday, the master bedroom is ours." Debris. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't even a person to him. I was debris. I was trash that needed to be swept out so his new life could move in. The cruelty was so casual, so transactional. He didn't kick me out because he was suddenly rich and confused. He kicked me out because he had a deadline for his mistress's lease. I sat there on the floor, the cold light of the tablet illuminating my tear-streaked face. But as I read on, the tears stopped. Sadness is a heavy, wet blanket that suffocates you. But rage is fuel. Rage is clarifying. I scrolled up further, looking for a name, a face, anything to identify Archie. And then I found it, a screenshot he had sent her of a flight confirmation. Her name was on the ticket, Simone V. And right below that, a text that changed everything. It wasn't about love or sex or moving in. It was about money. Simone had asked, "Are you sure she can't touch the uncle's money? If she gets a lawyer, we're screwed." And Brent, my confident, arrogant, stupid husband, had replied, "Don't worry. I made her sign that bogus retro agreement years ago. She thinks it's real. Plus, I've moved the bulk of the cash into the account we talked about. Even if she sues, on paper, I'm broke." I froze. The world narrowed down to that single sentence. The account we talked about. He admitted it. In writing. He admitted the document was bogus. He admitted to hiding assets. And he admitted to conspiracy with this woman. I wasn't just looking at proof of an affair anymore. I was looking at a digital confession of fraud. I took a screenshot. Then another. Then I emailed them to myself, to Iris, and to a dummy account I hadn't used since college. I felt a strange, vibrating energy in my fingertips. I walked over to the window and looked out at the dark street. I thought about Brent sleeping in our bed. His bed now. Probably dreaming of his new life with Simone, thinking I was crying in a motel room somewhere, defeated. He thought he had cleared the debris. He had no idea he had just handed the debris a match. I wasn't going to just sue him for divorce. I was going to burn his entire kingdom to the ground, and I had the map to where he hid the gasoline. I walked into Helena's office at 8:00 a.m. sharp, looking like a ghost who had just seen her own murder. I hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, and hadn't changed clothes, but I was vibrating with a strange, cold energy. I slammed the tablet down on her mahogany desk, right on top of her perfectly organized files. I told her to read the thread under Archie. I told her to look at the dates. I told her to look at the confession. Helena put on her glasses, her face unreadable, and started scrolling. The room was silent for 10 minutes, the only sound the rhythmic tapping of her finger against the glass screen. When she finally looked up, the professional mask was gone. She looked fierce. She told me that in 20 years of family law, she had seen men be stupid, and she had seen men be cruel, but Brent had managed to achieve a rare platinum status in both categories simultaneously. She explained that by admitting to the bogus nature of the agreement in writing, he had just handed us the keys to the kingdom. But then she warned me that we needed to know exactly how much he was hiding before we pulled the trigger. She said we needed a forensic accountant, someone who could follow the digital breadcrumbs Brent was so carelessly leaving behind. We spent the next 3 days in a war room that smelled of stale coffee and printer ink. Helena brought in a guy named Marcus, an accountant who looked like a high school math teacher but hunted hidden assets like a bloodhound. I gave them everything I had. Passwords, old bank statements I found in boxes, social security numbers. And as Marcus started peeling back the layers of Brent's financial life, the floor fell out from under me. I thought the betrayal was just the affair. I thought it was just the $10 million he didn't want to share. But as Marcus pulled up the records on the big screen, I realized the knife in my back went so much deeper than I ever imagined. We found the account we talked about. It wasn't just a savings account. It was an offshore shell set up 6 months ago. 6 months, long before his uncle died. Brent had been planning an exit strategy for half a year, but the money in there wasn't from his salary. Marcus pointed to a series of transfers and asked me if I recognized a specific withdrawal of $20,000 back in February. I stared at the number. It hit me like a physical blow. That was the emergency fund. That was the money I had saved dollar by dollar, skipping lunches, cutting my own hair, saving for the baby we had talked about having someday. I remembered Brent telling me the market was volatile and he was moving it to a high-yield bond. He hadn't moved it to a bond. He had moved it to an account accessible only by him and Simone. And it got worse. Marcus found the credit card statements, not our joint card, but a card opened in his name that I didn't know existed. The balance was staggering. He had racked up $40,000 in 3 months. I saw the charges scrolling past. Luxury hotels in Miami when he said he was at a conference in Houston, dinners at steakhouses that cost more than my weekly salary. And gifts. A diamond tennis bracelet, a designer handbag, a lease down payment on a luxury apartment downtown. I felt sick. I physically gagged. I had been at home, eating leftovers, turning off lights to save on the electric bill, while he was spending our future on a woman he met at a bar. I saw the dates. The bracelet was bought on my birthday. I remembered that day. He had come home late, told me he was swamped at work, and given me a card and a generic bouquet of flowers he picked up at the gas station. He had spent the afternoon buying diamonds for her. But the final blow, the thing that truly broke me, was the house. I asked Marcus to check the mortgage. I told him about the $50,000 I put down from my grandmother's inheritance. I told him we had about 30% equity. Marcus clicked a few keys, frowned, and typed again. He looked at me with genuine pity in his eyes. He told me there was no equity. He explained that 6 weeks ago, Brent had taken out a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, maxing out the value of the house. He forged my signature on the consent form. It was sloppy, digitally pasted from another document, but it had passed the bank's automated review. He had drained the equity, my grandmother's legacy, and funneled it all into the offshore account. The house wasn't an asset anymore. It was a shell, loaded with debt that he intended to leave me with. I sat in that chair, feeling the weight of the deception crushing my chest. I had been sleeping next to a monster. He didn't just want to leave me. He wanted to destroy me. He wanted to leave me penniless, homeless, and drowning in debt, while he and Simone sailed off into the sunset with $10 million plus the scraps he stole from my life. Helena was talking. Something about fraud, about prison time, about freezing orders. But I couldn't hear her. All I could hear was the voice of the girl I used to be, the 16-year-old who believed in him, the 22-year-old who married him, the woman who sacrificed everything for his potential. I mourned her. I let her die right there in that office. I stood up. The room went quiet. Helena stopped talking. Marcus stopped typing. They were looking at me, expecting tears, expecting a breakdown. I walked over to the window and looked out at the city skyline. I saw the reflection of my own face in the glass. I looked tired, yes. I looked pale. But my eyes were dry. I turned back to them. I told Helena I didn't want to just sue him. I told her I didn't want a settlement. I wanted to watch him burn. I wanted him to feel every ounce of the fear I felt when I stood on that porch with my suitcases. I wanted to take the money, the house, the car, and his reputation. I wanted to strip him down until he was just the trailer park boy I met in Tampa, but this time, without me to save him. I looked at the screen with the evidence of his theft. I told them to file the papers. I told them to freeze everything. But not yet. I told them to wait until tomorrow, because tomorrow was Friday. And I knew from his calendar that tomorrow night, he and Simone were hosting a celebration dinner at our house for his old college friends to show off his new wealth. I told Helena we were going to crash the party. I parked my rental car 3 blocks away from the house. I couldn't bear to pull into the driveway and see the parade of luxury cars lining the curb, BMWs, Mercedes, a few Teslas. It looked like a car dealership for the morally bankrupt. Walking toward the house in the dark, I felt like a burglar casing my own life. The bass from the music was thumping so hard, I could feel it in the pavement through the soles of my sneakers. I wasn't dressed for a party. I was wearing jeans and an oversized sweater, my hair pulled back in a messy bun. I looked exactly like what I was supposed to be, the defeated, broken ex-wife coming to beg for scraps. That was the costume. That was the role I had to play perfectly if I wanted to get what I came for. I had my phone in my front pocket, the voice memo app already recording. I took a deep breath, swallowed the scream that was clawing its way up my throat, and rang the doorbell. It took a while for someone to answer. When the door finally swung open, it wasn't Brent. It was a woman I didn't recognize, holding a champagne flute, my crystal champagne flute from our wedding set. She looked me up and down with a glazed, tipsy smile and asked if I was the Uber Eats driver. I didn't answer. I just pushed past her into the foyer. The smell hit me first, a mix of expensive cologne, heavy floral perfume, and the distinct scent of catering that didn't belong in my kitchen. The house was packed. I saw people I vaguely recognized, some of Brent's college buddies, a few coworkers, laughing, drinking, treating my sanctuary like a frat house. Then I saw him. Brent was holding court in the living room, standing by the fireplace with a glass of scotch in one hand and his other arm draped possessively around a woman in a shimmering red dress. Simone. Seeing her in the flesh was like taking a punch to the gut. She was beautiful, I'll give her that. Sharp, polished, and looking at Brent like he was a god. She was wearing a necklace I recognized immediately, a vintage pearl pendant that had belonged to Brent's mother. He had told me it was lost in the move years ago. He had lied. He had saved it for someone worthy. The music died down as people started to notice me. The whispers spread like wildfire. That's her. That's the ex. She looks terrible. I kept my eyes on the floor, shrinking into myself, making myself look small. Brent finally noticed the silence and turned around. When he saw me, his face didn't show fear or guilt. It showed annoyance. He marched over, gripping my arm tight enough to bruise, and hissed that I had some nerve showing up here. He told me to get out before he called the cops. I made my voice tremble. I forced tears into my eyes. It wasn't hard. I told him I didn't want a scene. I told him I was broke, I had nowhere to go, and I just wanted to sign whatever papers he needed if he would just give me a little cash to get a motel room and some food. I played the desperate, pathetic woman he believed I was. I saw his ego inflate instantly. He loved this. He loved seeing me beg in front of his new friends. It validated everything he had told himself, that without him, I was nothing. He exchanged a look with Simone. She smirked, a cruel, victorious little smile, and whispered something in his ear. He nodded. He told the crowd to enjoy the drinks and dragged me into his home office, my old reading room, slamming the door behind us. Simone followed, leaning against the desk like she owned the place. Brent went to the safe, the one I wasn't supposed to know the combination to, but clearly he had changed it, and pulled out a document. He tossed it onto the desk in front of me. He told me it was a quitclaim deed and a waiver of future litigation. He said if I signed it right now, acknowledging that I had no interest in the property or the inheritance, he would write me a check for $5,000. Severance pay, he called it, laughing at his own joke. I picked up the pen, my hand shaking. I pretended to hesitate. I asked him in a small, stupid voice why he needed this if the separation agreement I signed 2 years ago was valid. I asked him if he was worried the judge wouldn't like it. That was the bait, and God did he bite. He leaned in, his face flushed with alcohol and arrogance. He told me I was even dumber than I looked. He said the old agreement was fine, but he didn't want to wait for the courts to drag their feet. He told me he needed this title clear now because he was leveraging the property for a business investment. He looked at Simone and winked. Then Simone spoke up. Her voice was smoky and condescending. She told me to just sign the paper because by Monday morning it wouldn't matter anyway. She said, "Honey, once the wire hits the account in the Caymans at 9:00 a.m. on Monday, you could sue us for the next 10 years and you wouldn't find a dime. We're just doing you a favor, giving you $5,000. By noon Monday, this house and everything in it will be owned by a trust you can't touch." My heart stopped. Monday at 9 EOAM. Brent shot her a look, a flicker of annoyance that she had spoken too much, but he recovered quickly. He figured it didn't matter. Who was I going to tell? I was nobody. He tapped the paper with his finger. He told me the wire transfer was already queued up, approved by his friend at the bank, and scheduled to execute the second the markets opened. He said the money was basically already gone. I looked down at the paper. If I signed this, I was admitting I had no rights. But I had what I needed. I had the timeline. I had the destination. Caymans. I had the admission that the transfer was queued. I pretended to hyperventilate. I dropped the pen. I told them I felt sick, that I needed water. I told them I couldn't sign it while I was this dizzy. I backed away toward the door. Brent rolled his eyes and told me to stop being dramatic. He said I could come back tomorrow when I was sober, but the offer would drop to $2,000. He told me to get out of his sight. I ran. I ran out of the office, through the crowd of laughing strangers, and out the front door. I didn't stop until I was back in my rental car, locking the doors with shaking hands. I pulled out my phone and stopped the recording. I played back the last 30 seconds. Simone's voice was crystal clear. Once the wire hits the account in the Caymans at 9:00 a.m. on Monday. I sat there in the dark, my breathing ragged, staring at the dashboard clock. It was Friday night, 11:00 p.m. I didn't just have evidence of their plan. I had a countdown. I had exactly 58 hours before $10 million vanished from the face of the earth. Brent thought he had won because he held the checkbook, but he had just given me the one thing more valuable than money, a deadline. And he had no idea that the broken woman running away from his house wasn't fleeing in fear. I was racing the clock. I drove to Helena's house like a fugitive, checking my rearview mirror every few seconds to make sure no one was following me. It was past midnight, and the adrenaline that had propelled me out of Brent's house was starting to curdle into a sickening mixture of exhaustion and terror. When I banged on Helena's door, I probably looked like a madwoman. But she didn't blink. She was wearing a silk robe and holding a glass of water, and she just ushered me into her kitchen. I didn't say a word. I just plugged my phone into her portable speaker and pressed play. Simone's voice filled the sleek, modern kitchen, calm and deadly. Once the wire hits the account in the Caymans at 9:00 a.m. on Monday. You wouldn't find a dime. Helena listened to the recording 3 times. The first time, she frowned. The second time, she took notes. The third time, she looked at me with a terrifying intensity and told me I had done something incredibly dangerous and incredibly brilliant. She said we had the what and the when. We knew the crime, fraudulent conveyance of marital assets, and we knew the deadline. But then she looked at the clock on the microwave. It was 12:45 a.m. on Saturday. She reminded me that banks don't open until Monday. Courts are closed. Judges are at their lake houses or on golf courses. We were in the dead zone of the legal week. If we filed a standard motion on Monday morning at 9 a.m., the money would already be crossing international borders while the court clerk was still stirring her coffee. She called Marcus immediately. He picked up on the first ring. I started to wonder if the man ever slept. Helena put him on speaker and explained the situation. She told him about the Cayman account and the Monday deadline. Marcus was quiet for a moment, the sound of typing filling the background silence. Then he asked me for the name of the company or entity the money was going to. I told him what I had heard Brent whisper to Simone earlier in the night, something about Blue Horizon Holdings. Well, Marcus told us to give him an hour. I spent that hour pacing Helena's kitchen floor, drinking coffee I didn't need, while Helena made phone calls to people I assumed were powerful. She was speaking in a low, urgent tone, calling in favors, using words like emergency injunction and flight risk. I felt like I was watching a movie of someone else's life. Just a week ago, my biggest worry was whether the chicken in the fridge had gone bad. Now, I was plotting to intercept a $10 million international wire transfer. When Marcus called back, his voice had changed. He didn't sound like a bored accountant anymore. He sounded excited. He told us to sit down. He said he had run a deep background check on Simone Weil, cross-referencing her with the company Blue Horizon Holdings. It turns out, Simone wasn't an executive. She wasn't even Simone. Her real name was Vanessa Thorpe, and she had a rap sheet in 3 different states. Marcus sent a file to Helena's iPad, and she slid it over to me. I stared at the mugshot. It was younger, less polished, without the expensive highlights. But it was her. The eyes were the same, cold and predatory. Marcus explained her M.O. She targeted men who came into sudden money, lottery winners, inheritance recipients, tech guys who just sold their startups. She would swoop in, convince them their wives or partners were holding them back, and isolate them. She would set up tax haven structures for them, promising to protect their wealth. But here was the kicker, the revelation that made my jaw hit the floor. Marcus had found the registration documents for Blue Horizon Holdings in the Cayman Islands Public Registry, or at least the layers he could access. It wasn't a joint trust. It wasn't a holding company for Brent's assets. It was a sole proprietorship. The sole owner was Vanessa Thorpe. I felt a laugh bubble up in my chest, hysterical and dark. Brent wasn't hiding the money with her. He was giving it to her. He thought he was being clever, transferring the assets to hide them from me, believing she was his partner in crime. But he was the mark. As soon as that wire hit the account on Monday morning, he wouldn't just be hiding the money from me. He would be losing it forever. Simone, Vanessa, was going to take every cent and disappear, leaving him with nothing but a foreclosed house and a furious ex-wife. The realization changed everything. It wasn't just a divorce case anymore. It was an active swindle in progress. Helena slammed her hand on the table. She said this was the silver bullet. A judge might hesitate to freeze assets based on a messy divorce over the weekend, but stopping a known con artist from draining a victim's account? That was a different ballgame. She told me we had enough to get an emergency ex parte hearing. This is a special kind of hearing where the other side doesn't even get notified because the risk of them destroying evidence or moving money is too high. But we needed a judge, a specific kind of judge. Helena told me that the judge on emergency rotation this weekend was Judge Miller, a man known for being slow, bureaucratic, and hating weekend disturbances. If we went to him, he'd likely tell us to file Monday morning, which would be too late. We needed a bypass. Helena looked at me and asked if I remembered who Brent's friend at the bank was, the one he mentioned who approved the transfer. I racked my brain, thinking back to the office parties I was forced to attend, the fake smiles, the boring conversations, and then it clicked. "Gary," I said. "Gary Stevenson. He's a branch manager at First City. He went to college with Brent." Helena's eyes lit up. She told me she didn't know Gary, but she knew his boss. She knew the regional director of compliance for First City Bank, a woman named Patricia Wu. Helena had represented Patricia in her own nasty divorce 3 years ago and had gotten her full custody of her kids. Patricia owed Helena. Big time. Helena grabbed her phone. She told me that if we could get the compliance director to flag the transaction internally as suspicious activity due to potential fraud, the bank would be legally required to freeze the wire for review, regardless of what time it was or what Gary had approved. It wouldn't stop it forever, but it would buy us the one thing we didn't have: time to get into a courtroom. She dialed the number. It was 2:00 a.m. I watched her face as the phone rang. Once, twice, 3 times. If Patricia didn't pick up, or if she refused to get involved on a weekend based on a client's hunch, we were dead in the water. Then the line connected. Helena's voice dropped into that smooth, commanding tone. She said, "Patricia, it's Helena Marsh. I'm sorry to wake you, but I have a situation that involves a $10 million fraudulent transfer going through your bank in 48 hours. And if it clears, your branch manager Gary is going to be an accessory to a felony. I think we need to talk." She listened for a moment, then looked at me and winked. We had the resource, we had the leverage, but as I sat there, looking at the mugshot of the woman sleeping in my bed, I realized that saving the money was only half the battle. Brent was about to be destroyed, one way or another. The only question left was whether I wanted to save the money for myself or let him learn the hardest lesson of his life. And then I realized I didn't have to choose. I could do both. Sunday was the longest day of my life. It felt less like a day and more like a held breath. While the rest of the world was having brunch and going to church, I was sitting in Helena's war room watching the pieces of my ex-husband's destruction fall into place. Patricia Wu, the compliance director at the bank, had come through. She confirmed that at 8:00 a.m. on Monday, a Level 3 fraud alert would be placed on Brent's accounts. It wouldn't just stop the wire transfer, it would freeze everything. His checking, his savings, his credit cards. To him, it would look like a system error. To Gary, the corrupt branch manager, it would look like a compliance audit from hell. But a freeze wasn't enough for me. I didn't want to just save the money legally. I wanted to witness the moment the illusion shattered. I wanted to be there when the ground fell out from beneath him. Helena advised against it. She told me to stay in her office, to let the lawyers handle the paperwork, to be civil. She said showing up at the bank was risky and emotional. I looked at her and told her that Civil was the woman who paid for his engineering degree. That woman was dead. The woman sitting in front of her wanted blood. I spent the afternoon obsessively monitoring Brent's digital footprint on the tablet he still hadn't unlinked. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. He was posting on Instagram every hour, a picture of a $50 Xiaomi Rolex with the caption, "Time for an upgrade." A video of him and Simone clinking glasses on the deck of my house with the caption, "New life loading, 99%. He was so confident. He was so staggeringly arrogant. He truly believed he had won. He had no idea that the woman he was toasting with was a predator who had already booked a one-way flight to Zurich for Monday afternoon, a little detail Marcus had dug up from the airline database. And then I found the ammunition I didn't know I needed. I was scrolling through his drafts folder in his email, looking for any last-minute communications with his lawyer. Instead, I found an email addressed to the senior partners at his engineering firm. It was scheduled to send automatically at 9:05 a.m. on Monday, 5 minutes after he expected the money to clear. The subject line was, "I quit." What? But the body of the email wasn't a professional resignation. It was a bridge-burning manifesto. He insulted his boss's intelligence, mocked the company's projects, and bragged about being richer than all of you combined. My heart started racing. This was it. This was the point of no return. He wasn't just stealing the money, he was dismantling his entire safety net. He was betting his career, his reputation, and his livelihood on that transfer going through. If the money didn't clear, he wouldn't just be broke, he would be unemployable. He would be a pariah in his industry. I called Helena over and showed her the screen. Even she looked shocked. She realized what this meant. We weren't just stopping a theft, we were watching a man walk off a cliff blindfolded. We finalized the plan. We knew from intercepted texts that Brent and Simone were meeting Gary at the bank branch at 8:45 a.m. to personally oversee the wire transfer. They wanted VIP treatment, they wanted coffee and handshakes while they robbed me blind. That was my entry point. I didn't sleep Sunday night. I spent the hours staring at the ceiling, rehearsing what I would say. I thought about the girl I was at 16, the one who believed love was enough. I thought about the nights I stayed up late helping him study for exams he was too tired to take. I thought about the moment he told me I was debris. I took all that pain, all that humiliation, and I packed it down into a hard, cold ball in the center of my chest. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to scream. I was going to be ice. Monday morning broke with a gray, heavy sky. It fit my mood perfectly. I showered and dressed with the precision of a soldier putting on armor. I didn't wear the sweatpants or the mom jeans Brent mocked. I put on a tailored black suit I had bought for an interview years ago, but never wore because Brent said it made me look too aggressive. I put on heels that clicked sharply against the floor. I pulled my hair back tight. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize myself. Good. Brent wouldn't recognize me either. I drove to the bank, parking across the street. I watched his car pull in at 8:40 a.m. He got out, looking like he owned the sidewalk. He was wearing a new suit, sunglasses, smiling like a movie star. Simone was on his arm, looking bored and checking her watch, probably counting down the minutes until her flight. They walked into the bank like royalty. I waited exactly 5 minutes. I wanted them to get settled. I wanted them to be in the office, coffee in hand, feeling safe. I wanted the anticipation to be at its peak. At 8:45 a.m., I opened my car door. The air was cold. I checked my phone one last time. Helena texted me, "The freeze is active. Go." I walked across the street, my heels striking the pavement with a rhythm that sounded like a war drum in my ears. I wasn't just walking into a bank. I was walking into the rest of my life. I pushed open the heavy glass doors of First City Bank, the cool air conditioning hitting my face. The lobby was quiet. The receptionist looked up, smiling politely, about to ask if I needed help. I didn't stop. I walked straight past her, toward the glass-walled conference room in the back where I could see the back of Brent's head. He was laughing. I could see his shoulders shaking. He was celebrating. I reached for the handle of the glass door. In my mind, I wasn't just opening a door. I was pulling the pin on a grenade. I took a breath, turned the handle, and stepped inside. The silence that fell over that glass-walled conference room was heavy, the kind of silence that happens right before a car crash when you see the headlights coming but can't turn the wheel. 3 pairs of eyes locked onto me. Gary, the banker, looked confused, his hand freezing over his mouse. Simone looked annoyed, like I was a waitress who had brought the wrong order. But Brent? Brent looked at me with a mixture of shock and pure, unfiltered contempt. He didn't see a threat. He saw a nuisance. He saw the debris he thought he had swept away, blowing back into his pristine new life. He didn't even stand up. He just leaned back in his leather chair, swirled the coffee in his cup, and asked me what the hell I was doing there. He told me that if I had come to beg for the $2,000, I was too late, and that I should wait outside until he was done with real business. He actually chuckled, looking at Gary for validation. He said I always had impeccable timing for embarrassing myself. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't flip the table. I just pulled out the empty chair at the head of the table, the position of power, and sat down. I placed my handbag on the table with a deliberate calmness that I saw ripple through the room. I saw Simone's eyes narrow. She was a predator, and predators recognize when the dynamic in a room shifts. She sensed something Brent was too arrogant to see. I looked at Gary and told him to proceed. I said, "Don't let me stop you, Gary. Push the button. I'm just here to watch." Gary looked nervous. He glanced at Brent, then at his screen. Brent snapped his fingers and told Gary to ignore me, to just finish the transfer so they could get out of there. He said he had a celebration lunch to get to. Gary nodded, wiping sweat from his upper lip, and turned back to his computer. I watched his index finger hover over the confirm wire button. I held my breath. This was the moment 12 years of loyalty died, and the moment my justice began. Gary clicked the mouse. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a sharp, jarring beep echoed from the computer speakers. A red box popped up on the screen. I couldn't read the text from where I was sitting, but I didn't have to. I knew exactly what it said. Compliance alert. Code red. Assets frozen. Gary frowned. He clicked again. Beep? He started typing furiously, his face flushing a deep, unhealthy red. He muttered something about a system glitch. He told Brent to hang on a second, that the system was being weird. Brent sighed, loud and dramatic. He told Gary that for a bank that held $10 million of his money, their IT department was a joke. He checked his Rolex. He told Gary to hurry up because they had a flight to catch later. I spoke up then. My voice was soft, steady, and cold. I told Brent he wasn't going anywhere. He finally looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time since I walked in. He asked me what I did. He accused me of trying to hack his account with my clumsy password guesses. He told me I was pathetic. I reached into my bag and pulled out a manila envelope. I slid it across the polished mahogany table toward him. I told him it wasn't a hack, it was a federal fraud alert. I told him that his friend, Gary, wasn't just having IT problems. He was currently locked out of the banking system because Patricia Wu, the regional director, had flagged the transaction as a felony in progress. Gary went pale. He pushed his chair back, looking like he was about to throw up. He knew Patricia's name. He knew what that meant. Brent laughed. It was a nervous, cracking sound. He told me I was bluffing. He said I didn't know anyone important. He said I was just a secretary who got lucky with a lawyer. He reached for the envelope, his hands shaking just slightly. I told him to open it. But I told him the fraud alert wasn't the most interesting thing in there. I told him he should look at the second document. He ripped the envelope open. He pulled out the paper. It wasn't a bank statement. It was the printout Marcus had given me. The mugshot, the criminal record, the real name. I watched his face. I watched the color drain out of it until he looked like a wax figure. He stared at the photo of the woman sitting next to him. He looked at the name, Vanessa Thorpe. He looked at the charges, grand larceny, identity theft, fraud. He looked up at Simone. His eyes were wide, childlike in their confusion. He asked her, in a whisper, "Who is Vanessa?" The air in the room vanished. Simone. Vanessa didn't look at him. She looked at me. Her face was a mask of pure hatred. She knew the game was over. She didn't try to deny it. She didn't cry. She just reached for her purse, her movements sharp and fast. She told Brent he was an idiot. She said she should have known he would mess this up because he was too sloppy, too loud, and too stupid to handle real money. She stood up, smoothing her dress, and told him she was leaving. Brent looked shattered. The betrayal hit him harder than the frozen money. He stood up, grabbing her arm, asking her what she was talking about. He asked her about their life, about the house, about the love she claimed to have for him. She laughed in his face. She told him she didn't love him. She loved the zero balance on his tax liability. She shook him off and headed for the door. But I wasn't done. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 9:06 a.m. I looked at Brent, who was standing there trembling, caught between a frozen bank account and a fleeing con artist. I told him he might want to check his phone. He looked at me, dazed. He asked why. I told him that at 9:05 a.m., a scheduled email had been sent from his personal account to the senior partners at his firm. I quoted the subject line to him. I quit. I told him that by now, his boss, his boss's boss, and HR had all read his manifesto about how they were incompetent and how he was too rich to work for them anymore. I saw the realization hit him like a physical blow. He patted his pocket frantically, pulling out his phone. The screen was lit up with notifications. Missed calls from his boss, texts from coworkers asking if he was drunk, an automated reply from HR confirming receipt of his resignation. He slumped back into his chair, the phone slipping from his fingers and clattering onto the table. He looked at the frozen computer screen. He looked at the door where Vanessa was trying to leave. He looked at me. He had no money, he had no girlfriend, and as of 1 minute ago, he had no job. I stood up. I smoothed my blazer. I looked down at him, the man who had called me debris. I told him that he was right about one thing. We weren't on the same level anymore. I told him I hoped he enjoyed the trailer park, because I had a feeling he'd be heading back there soon. Then, I turned to the glass door. Vanessa was struggling with the handle, but it wouldn't budge. I looked at her, then back at Gary, who was hiding his face in his hands. I smiled. Oh, I forgot to mention, when a code red fraud alert is triggered, the bank goes into automatic lockdown until the police arrive. The doors locked 2 minutes ago. Sirens began to wail in the distance, getting closer. The 3 minutes between the locking of the doors and the arrival of the police were the longest and quietest of my life. The room felt like a pressure cooker. Gary was hyperventilating, his head between his knees, muttering about his pension and his kids. Vanessa, or whatever her name really was, had stopped banging on the glass. She had dropped the act entirely. She leaned against the wall, arms crossed, staring at Brent with eyes that could strip paint. But Brent was the one who fascinated me. He was cycling through the 5 stages of grief in real time. He went from denial, this is a mistake, to anger. You did this to me. And then, inevitably, he landed on bargaining. He turned his chair toward me. His face was pale, sweating, his eyes darting around the room like a trapped animal. He reached out across the table, trying to take my hand. I pulled back as if he were burning hot. He started talking, fast and desperate. He told me we could fix this. He said he would fire Gary. He said he would testify against Vanessa. He told me he was just confused, that the money had gone to his head, but that deep down, he still loved me. He actually used the word soulmate. He said if I just told the police it was a misunderstanding, we could walk out of here, go home, and start over. He said, "Thalia, baby, we have $10 million. We can go anywhere. Don't throw that away over a little fight." I looked at him, and for the first time in years, I saw him clearly. I didn't see the handsome engineer I had idolized. I didn't see the husband I had mourned. I saw a weak, hollow man who thought people were vending machines. You put money in, and you get what you want. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't anger anymore. It was disgust. Pure, cold disgust. I told him that he was missing the point. I told him there was no we. I told him that the $10 million wasn't his anymore, and it certainly wasn't ours. I told him he had spent 12 years building a life on my back, and it took me exactly 3 days to kick the legs out from under him. Then, the blue lights flashed against the glass walls of the conference room. The heavy front doors were pried open. Officers swarmed the lobby. I saw Patricia Wu walking in behind them, looking like an executioner in a Chanel suit. The next 20 minutes were a blur of shouting and confusion, but I sat perfectly still. When the lead detective entered the room, Gary immediately started crying and pointing at Brent. He squealed. He told them everything, that Brent had pressured him, that Brent had offered him a kickback, that he was just following orders. Vanessa was different. When the officer asked for her ID, she smiled a sharp, razor-thin smile and handed over a passport that I knew was fake. But then I spoke up. I handed the detective the file Marcus had compiled. I told him to check her fingerprints against the file for Vanessa Thorpe. I told him she was wanted in 3 states for elder fraud and identity theft. The look she gave me could have stopped a heart, but she didn't fight when they cuffed her. She knew when to fold. But the main event was Brent. The officer turned to him. Brent tried to pull rank. He puffed up his chest, raised his voice, and demanded to speak to his lawyer. He told the officer that this was his money. His bank, and his wife, was having a mental breakdown. I stood up then. I walked over to the detective and handed him the last piece of paper in my envelope. It was the copy of the HELOC agreement, the loan against our house that Brent had taken out secretly. I pointed to the signature at the bottom, Thalia Reynolds. I told the officer, calm and clear, that I did not sign that document. I told him my husband had forged my signature to drain the equity from our marital home and funnel it into an offshore account to hide it from a divorce court. That was the nail in the coffin. Wire fraud is complex. Money laundering takes time to prove. But forgery? Forgery is simple. Forgery is a felony. The officer looked at the document, then at me, then at Brent. He pulled out his handcuffs. Brent's face crumbled. The arrogance, the bluster, the rich man persona, it all evaporated. He started screaming. He screamed that it was a mistake. He screamed that I was lying. He screamed at Gary to tell the truth. As the officer spun him around and slammed him against the glass wall to cuff him, Brent looked at me. His eyes were wide with terror. He asked me, "Thalia, what are you doing?" "I'm your husband." I looked him dead in the eye. I told him he wasn't my husband. I told him he was a bad investment and I was liquidating my assets. They dragged him out. He was crying now, ugly, heaving sobs that echoed in the lobby. I watched him go. I watched the man who had left me in the rain with 2 suitcases being shoved into the back of a police cruiser in front of a crowd of onlookers. I saw the employees of the bank filming with their phones. I knew that by noon the video would be everywhere. His career was gone. His reputation was incinerated. His freedom was forfeit. Patricia Wu walked over to me. She looked at the empty chair where Brent had been sitting, then at me. She didn't smile, but there was a look of deep respect in her eyes. She told me that the accounts were fully frozen pending the investigation, but given the evidence of fraud in the forged signature, the bank would be reversing the transfers. She told me that once the divorce was finalized, the funds would be released according to the court order. She told me I had just saved the bank a massive liability lawsuit. I thanked her. I picked up my handbag. I felt light. Not happy exactly, but light. The weight of the last 12 years, the weight of trying to be good enough for a man who never saw me, was gone. I walked out of the bank. The sun had finally broken through the gray clouds. The air smelled like rain and exhaust fumes, but to me it smelled like freedom. I walked to my car, my heels clicking on the pavement. I sat in the driver's seat and closed my eyes, letting the adrenaline crash over me. But then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Helena. It was a screenshot of a document she had just received from the court. It was the emergency order granting me full control of the marital assets until the trial. But there was a second message below it. "Thalia, You need to come to my office. Now. We found something else in the forensic audit of the uncle's estate. Brent didn't just inherit $10 million. There was a secondary clause in the will, one that Brent evidently didn't read because he was too busy buying Porsches and cheating on you. I stared at the screen. My heart hammered against my ribs. I thought it was over. I thought I had won. But the game wasn't just about who got the money. It was about who knew the rules. And apparently, there was one rule left that even Brent didn't know about. I sat in Helena's office one last time, clutching a cup of tea that finally didn't taste like anxiety. The document lying on the desk between us was the final nail in the coffin of the life I used to have, and the blueprint for the one I was about to build. Helena explained the clause in Uncle Marcus's will with a smirk that could have cut glass. It turns out Brent's uncle wasn't just rich, he was observant. He had visited us a few times over the years. Thanksgiving dinners where I cooked everything, Christmases where I bought the gifts he took credit for. He saw who ran the household. He saw who kept Brent grounded. The clause was simple but devastating for Brent. It stated that if the beneficiary was married at the time of the bequest, the funds were to be placed in a trust for the joint benefit of the household, specifically to ensure the stability of the family unit. Brent knew this. That's why he had been so desperate to fake the retroactive separation of assets. That's why he tried to hide the money offshore. He wasn't just trying to keep his inheritance. He was trying to bypass the specific wishes of the man who gave it to him. He knew that legally, that money was never just his. It was ours, and by trying to steal it, he had violated the fiduciary duty of the estate. The divorce proceedings were less of a battle and more of a harvest. The judge, a stern woman who had zero patience for financial fraud, looked at the police report, the forged HELOC documents, and the uncle's will, and she practically handed me the gavel. She ruled that because of Brent's attempt to defraud the marital estate, the standard 50-50 split wasn't enough. She invoked penalties. I walked away with $5 million from the inheritance. Then, she awarded me 70% of the value of the house, considering my initial down payment and the fact that Brent had illegally drained the equity. But the sweetest part was the restitution. The judge ordered Brent to pay back every cent I had spent on his education, plus interest. $300,000 for the years I slaved away to make him an engineer. And finally, she made him pay my legal fees. $50,000 to Helena, who earned every penny. When the dust settled, I left that courtroom with nearly $5.5 million and a clean slate. Brent left with a criminal record, a suspended engineering license, and a debt to the IRS that will haunt him for decades. It's been a year since that day in the bank. I didn't keep the house. I couldn't live in a place that smelled like his cologne and my old desperation. I sold it to a nice young couple who had no idea about the war that had been fought in their living room. I packed up my things. Not in garbage bags this time, but in professional moving boxes. And I drove north. I live in Charleston now. I bought a condo overlooking the harbor with big windows that let in the light. I wake up when I want to. I drink coffee on my balcony and watch the boats come in. But I didn't just retire. I went back to school. I'm finally getting that degree in business administration I put on hold to pay for Brent's calculus textbooks. I sit in lecture halls with kids 10 years younger than me, and I raise my hand for every question. I'm not the old student. I'm the focused one. I'm the one who knows exactly what it costs to give up on your own dreams, and I'm never making that transaction again. As for Brent, I hear things through the grapevine, mostly from Iris, who still stalks his social media for sport. He didn't go to prison for long. He took a plea deal, probation, and a massive fine. But the money is gone. He spent what was left of his share on criminal defense lawyers and trying to pay off the debts he racked up during his millionaire phase. He had to sell the Porsche at a loss. He lives in a studio apartment on the edge of town now. He got a job as a junior consultant at a small firm because no major engineering company would hire him with a fraud record. He's back to where he started. Only now, he's bitter, alone, and aging poorly. He tried to follow me on Instagram last month. I saw the notification pop up on my phone while I was studying for finals. Brent Engineered sent a request. I stared at it for a moment. I remembered the way he looked at me when he told me I was debris. I remembered the way he looked when the police cuffed him. And then, without a shred of emotion, I pressed block. It was the easiest click of my life. Iris told me he tells people I stole his inheritance. He spins a story where he's the victim of a gold-digging wife and a corrupt legal system. It makes me laugh. Let him have his story. It's the only thing he has left. I used to think my life was a tragedy because I wasted 12 years on a man who didn't love me. But I realized something recently. I didn't waste them. I was in training. I learned how to manage money, how to run a household, how to endure pressure, and how to spot a liar. I learned that I am capable of surviving the worst betrayal imaginable and coming out the other side, not just intact, but upgraded. I built a man from nothing, and when he tried to destroy me, I dismantled him with the same hands. We all have stories like this, don't we? Maybe not with $10 million at stake, but we've all felt that sting of betrayal, that moment when you realize the person you trusted is a stranger. If you've ever had to rebuild yourself from the ground up, I want to know where you're fighting from. Drop a comment below and tell me what city you're watching from. Let's see how global this sisterhood of survivors really is. And if you want to hear more stories about women taking back their power, exposing the truth, and getting exactly what they deserve, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You don't want to miss what happens next. Because if there's one thing I learned from my ex-husband, it's that the best revenge isn't just living well. It's making sure everyone knows the truth. My name is Thalia, I'm 29 years old, and I'm just getting started.